G'day, my name's Jeremy Clark. I'm a Catholic priest, a member of the Australian province of the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits. When I was a high school boy at St Ignatius College in Sydney in the early 1980s, I first heard about a Jesuit missionary to China in the 16th century, a man called Matteo Ricci. At about the same time, I also started studying Chinese language and culture. And then I went to China for the first time in 1985, and it's been true to say that ever since those days, Ricci and the Chinese Catholic Church and Chinese language and culture have been a constant in my life. My students at Boston College have been great. But they do surprise me, I must admit, because when they study with me, there's not too many of them who know all that much about Ricci or about the history of the Catholic Church in China. Now, it does surprise me because Ricci is a very significant world figure in history. He looms large in the history of East-West cultural exchange. Chinese students, however, Chinese people at large, do know about Ricci, do know about利瑪竇. He appears in textbooks. There are annual conferences on him. People visit his cemetery. People know that he brought Western science and learning to China, but they also know that he was a missionary, that he was expounding upon the teachings of the Lord of Heaven, of Christ. During his own lifetime, people came to him either for the science or to hear him talk about Jesus. Some people came to him for both. What I want to do is tell you something about Ricci's life and his story. And in telling something about his life and story and his journey from the south of China all the way up to Beijing in the north, tell you something about how the Catholic Church has developed also, not just during his life, but in the last 400 years as well. This is not the beginning. Ricci did not begin the story of the Catholic Church in China. That began actually centuries before him. But more particularly in the Jesuit sense, it began with Francis Xavier and Alessandro Vallegnano. That began down south, and that's where we're going to go as well. It's important to come here to have a look, but we're going to come here at the end of our story as well. It's also important to begin here because I really want to tell you that this is not National Geographic. You know, this is not actually kind of Lonely Planet, or but hopefully one of those stations will want to pick it up because it's a really interesting story. But this is two blokes, two Jesuits, Jim McDermott and myself, Jeremy Clark, trying to tell you a story, dealing with all the messiness of what it is to kind of do guerrilla filming in China. We've had people wandering around in the background, we've had traffic driving past, we've been dealing with shooting out the backseat of taxis, of buses, we've been in trains, we've been dealing with hotels, we've been dealing with all that sort of stuff. So basically, all the problems, the day-to-day troubles that you actually do when you're filming on the road with two blokes, a camera and a tripod. But come with us, it's kind of fun, it's got its moments, and let us tell you something of that history, of the history of Ricci and the Chinese Catholic Church. If you go from, if this is a middle there, yep. And the other one up there, and we're behind it. There's a street in front, This place is huge in the story of Matteo Ricci and the story of the Catholic Church in China. Even though Ricci himself arrived here in the early 1580s, Jesuit presence began here earlier in about 1560, when the first Jesuits arrived to Macau. The first community, however, was not started until about 1565. In many ways we can say the story started, however, when Alessandro Vallegnano, the visitor to the East, the architect of the Jesuit missions in the East, arrived here in 1578. In that year he decided we had to establish a college and a presence here in Macau to actually serve the church in Japan and to serve the church in China. He immediately called Michel Ruggieri to this place to learn Chinese, to then go into Chinese and talk about God in China. immediately after, not long after, Matteo Ricci joined him. This church was not actually here when Ricci himself lived in Macau. It was not designed until 1602 and was probably constructed and finished in the 1620s. The reason it is only a facade behind me is because it got burnt down by a fire in 1835. This complex around here consisted of a Jesuit college and this magnificent Jesuit church behind us. So here we have on the top of the Church of St. Paul's, there are various levels, and as I've said, it's a sermon in stone. It's been described by many people as one of the most beautiful churches in the world, except perhaps for St. Peter's in Rome. But here we actually have, on the second level, we have 4 saints. We have on the, over here on my right, we have the far side. That's the 3rd general of the Society of Jesus, Francis Borgia. It might be a surprise that he's actually one of the ones listed there. At the time he was only blessed, he had not yet been canonized. But he was put up there because he gave great impetus to the missions in the East. And so he was a great supporter of the work in Japan and China. On the end, because this was the college church, the college of the Mother of God, St. Paul's College, it was the college for the Jesuit missionaries and students, people who were learning about everything from science, mathematics, philosophy, all the things they would have learned back in Europe, things that they took around this region that they used in Japan, that they used in China, that they used in Cochin China or Vietnam. Well, so this was a college, it was a school. And hence we have Blessed Aloysius Gonzaga, Louis Gonzaga, and he's the final one up there because he's the patron saint of youth and thereby also of students. Just as they were great friends in life, so too do we have reunited on the front of this church facade, we have Ignatius and his great friend Francis Xavier. There was that gospel line that Ignatius loved, which was, "I have come to set fire on the earth, and how I wish it were blazing already." Well, Francis Xavier actually was the one who took that flame around the world, from Goa, through the Malaccas, to Japan, and to China. He never actually made it here, but nevertheless his memory lives on because of the great work that he did, how he brought the society to the doorway of China, to the doorway of Macau. And so here he is remembered forever in this sermon on stone. Well, today we're actually trying to go to Shangchuan Island, which is also known as Sanxian Island and also known as St. John's Island. This is where Francis Xavier tried to get into China. He tried to hitch a ride on a boat going up to China, and unfortunately it didn't work. And not only did it not work, he also died in the attempt. All the boats left and he got a fever and he died. I frankly think he died of sheer exhaustion. But anyway, he died there in 1552, and that really began the whole history of the endeavours of trying to get into China by the church and the missionaries, which ultimately was successful with Matteo Ricci later in 1583. But as you can see today, there's a lot of rain around, and in fact we're in the middle of a thing called Tropical Storm Goni, which has a temperature, which has a predicted wind, consistent wind speed of 75 kilometres an hour. Now that's we know that's not as fast as a New York taxi. It's probably actually a little bit quicker than a Macau taxi, I can safely tell you. But frankly, it's fast enough to stop the ferries going to Shangchuan. All the boats are in safely from the sea. They're safe in the harbour here, and a lot of traffic is stopped. That's why the roads are relatively empty. People are staying at home. Shops have got their shutters closed down, and the ferry is, at least as we've heard, not running. But anyway, we're going to give it a go, and what are our chances? Well, you know, I'm an Aussie. I think we'll give it a go anyway.
Ouais, s'y voit. 唔該問下去上村下村喺邊度去啊？直海下。今日冇船過啦係嘛？嚇？唔知啊，喺嗰度直海下，上村下村咯。10幾公里到啊嚇？轉喺嗰度去下。唔該。This is great.
We have actually made it to the wharf, and Shangchuan Island is actually over that way. As you can see, it's fair enough to say we are in a tropical storm, and I think it's also probably fair to say if Noel Coward said that mad dogs and Englishmen go out in the midday sun, I think you can probably say only ducks and Jesuits on pilgrimage probably come out to this little wharf. Anyway, we tried. We did have a go. Everything is locked down. We can't even get our car into the car park. We can't even go out here and actually at least gaze out at Xavier. The legend, of course, was that Francis Xavier was gazing out to China and never got there. Well, we're in China, but we actually can't even gaze out to Shangchuan at the moment. But at least we tried. And it's a reminder, actually, that of the 600 Jesuits who were sent to China, only 200 made it. They died at sea because of shipwreck, died because of storms, died because of pirates, and so on. So anyway, we had a go, but as you can see, it's very wet. So here we are, we're actually in Jiaoting, just on the outskirts, the other side of the river to where Richie would have lived. And we're going to a pagoda called the Wenming Pagoda, which is actually the, the cultured, the civilized pagoda. And it was actually built in 1588. The Jesuits were here from late 1582, we kicked out in 1583 to 1589. So what we're seeing, in fact, is something that's quite contemporaneous with the first period of Jesuit residence in this town, which was also the first period of the new stage of Christian history in China. Well, here we are at this more than 400-year-old temple. It was reconstructed actually only in 1996, and what's kind of ironic is that now in this place of great antiquity, it's actually become a lover's message wall. All these characters and all this graffiti here next to me actually say, "I love you." Now, in the context of the Ritchie story and the history of the Catholic Church in China, Ritchie grew to love China immensely. He loved the culture, the food, the language. He developed very deep and intimate friendships with many, many people, and his contributions are greatly respected by the Chinese people. But it's fair to say he didn't grow to love Jiaoting. This was a difficult place, a difficult post. There was the heat, the humidity, there was the opposition from townsfolk who didn't want these foreigners here. They thought they were too closely linked with the Portuguese in Macau and were perhaps the outriders of a foreign invasion. Ritchie and Ruggiere's house was attacked. Ruggiere was accused of adultery, which he was subsequently cleared from. But the constant opposition made Ritchie and Ruggiere feel really isolated, lonely, and opposed. They were also disconsolate because in the whole of this time, they managed to convert one person. So they came to set the world on fire, but in fact, it seems as though their dreams were smouldering around their feet. So people here love each other and send their messages of love, but for Ritchie, he didn't really end up loving Jiaoting. this street, Shizitie, or the Street of the Cross, the street of number 10 character, but also the Street of the Cross, was indeed where the first Jesuit residence was, and where we can say the modern Chinese Catholic history began. While Jiaoting was a difficult place for the early missionaries, it was nevertheless the place that Ricci and Ruggieri realised they could make a go of it. They realised by immersing themselves in language and culture, they could become part of the Chinese scene. So it is here that Ricci made his first world map. It is here that he wrote his first catechism, as had Ruggieri before him. And it's here too that they began to become proficient in language and culture, to the extent that they became aware of what they had to do to keep moving forward. So while it was a place of loneliness, it was nevertheless a place where seeds were planted, and the seeds were planted here, on this street.
On a train from Guangzhou to Nanchang. It's not so long as Chinese train rides go. It's a 14-hour train trip. We leave about 7 in the evening. We get in there at 8 next day. We're doing hard sleeper, which is a 3-bed bunk scenario. So there are cabins of 6 in about a 120 person train ride. It's not luxurious, but I find it very comfortable, and we're on the top bunk, which gives us a chance to reflect upon what we've experienced at Guanghai, which is near Shangchuan, and at Jiaoting, as we now travel to Nanchang, where Ricci really made a mark and really where the mission began to take off. Reflect